try to understand the facts of the matter for yourself. Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation did not free any slaves under Lincoln's management. It did not affect any slaves living in the United States or in any town which was controlled by the Union. On the contrary, Lincoln did claim to free the slaves held by Confederate states, which were by definition not his over which to legislate. If Lincoln's intention was to free the slaves and end slavery, would he not have freed the slaves and ended slavery in the states over which he was president? Instead, during a time of war, he claimed to free the slaves only of the Confederate states, and this was a psychological warfare technique intended to undermine the solidarity of the South, and it worked. The Emancipation Proclamation was a propaganda document, and the claims made therein were null and void as pertaining to Confederate states, and yet the only slaves Lincoln was claiming to free were those in Confederate states, not yet controlled by the Union. To help illustrate this point, here's a clip from the Ultimate History Lesson, A Weekend with John Taylor Gatto, where we're discussing the myth of the Civil War being fought to bring an end to slavery.
The Civil War changed that. We're sold that it was a great crusade against slavery by the school system. The major historians who've turned their attention to that say, to a person, that slavery was already dead. It was staggering through its last couple of generations, not because of a moral transformation on the part of plantation owners, but because the wives of the plantation owners were scratching their head and saying, my husband vanishes for a couple of days. We have all these new slaves and they're not black anymore. They're various shades of brown. So I'm thinking right now, I think Vern Parrington, but a number of historians 50 years ago said slavery was on its last legs because the Southern womanhood wouldn't stand for it any longer. Russia, I believe, had freed the serfs. Britain and the continent had done this thing. We were going to do it too. But it gave a nobility to the necessity to get rid of the Southern politicians who were trained in dialectical thinking, in rhetoric, and could run circles around the Northern politicians in Congress. They could produce the most compelling arguments for this or that, and so the South had to be gotten rid of.
From my understanding, those dry goods like cotton from the South that were produced by slaves were then going to factories in the North, and the factory owners in the North figured out that the slave owners were paying too much overhead. It cost a lot to keep a whole family fed, etc., and there were letters exchanged, and they actually discovered it was cheaper. Why not make everyone a slave who doesn't know that they're a slave?
A wage slave.
Right.
And think only about the welfare idea. If you have a plantation family and you require harmony, even though some people are very subordinate, if somebody gets sick or too old to work, you can't in fact do the Simon Legree bit and get rid of them, or what happens is morale collapses. So you have to care for them. The discussions on the highest level among northern industrialists, why should we have to support deadwood here? And we could do that if they were wage slaves. Yeah. And furthermore, people like Count Tolstoy was well aware of the hardcore underneath the romantic arguments, and so were a number of other people. But the public depended upon media and pulpits, which were subsidized by the owners, someone where they could think clearly, or someone would say, yeah, here's the truth, think about it.
Continue.